Welcome to this week's Patreon video, everyone. Notice I said Patreon and not YouTube because this video is going to be released on YouTube as well, so you can see what you're missing by not being on my Patreon. So not only do I teach Japanese on YouTube, but I also have a Patreon where I do more in-depth videos. I post additional videos every week, as well as posts like word of the day or phrase of the day, things like that. Little quizzes and things that you wouldn't see on YouTube. So if you would like to check that out, the link is right here, patreon.com/JoshTheCollins. You can also find this in the description, but here is an example of videos that I would do for Patreon that you would not be able to find on YouTube. Today's video is 10 things that are interesting or weird about Japan. So I've got a list of things that I experienced in Japan and things that I've just heard about in Japan that I did a little bit of research on to make this nice little list video for you. We all love list videos, don't we? We're gonna get started off with number one. And number one is that in Japan, you do not tip. So a lot of people probably already knew this, but tipping in Japan is kind of a no-no. It's considered rude in a lot of circumstances, and it's pretty rare for someone in Japan to willingly accept a tip unless they work with a lot of foreigners. So maybe a taxi driver next to a US military base might accept tips, but beyond that, you wouldn't tip a server or a bellhop or anyone that would provide you a service that you would normally tip in the US. You would not do so in Japan. Tipping's not really a thing in a lot of places, and Japan's one of those places. Number two, sneezing in Japan. Now, when you sneeze in countries like the United States, it's somewhat expected for people in your vicinity to say bless you, especially if there's somebody that knows you, like a coworker or a friend or family member. And I've heard a lot of stories as to why this is. I've heard stories about your heart skipping a beat when you sneeze, or something about demons, so they say bless you to keep demons away when you sneeze. But in Japan, you say nothing when someone sneezes. There's not a word for bless you when someone sneezes in Japan, although there is a word that would be bless you. It's like God bless you. It's something that's somewhat religious. You wouldn't say that when someone sneezes. So if you ever go to Japan and you sneeze and you look around expecting people to say bless you, you're probably going to be waiting for a long time because no one's going to say it. Number three, the most common Christmas meal in Japan. Most common Christmas meal in the United States is probably some sort of like ham or something like that, maybe. I feel like I've seen a lot of like Thanksgiving-ish meals served on Christmas in the United States. In Japan, though, there's one specific restaurant that is the most common place that people celebrate Christmas with a Christmas lunch or Christmas dinner, and that would be KFC. That's right. Kentucky Fried Chicken. I don't exactly know why this is. I've heard a couple different people say that it was a marketing ploy from KFC to try to sell more of their chicken. I've also heard people say that when Americans took over Japan after World War II, they didn't have turkey, so they just settled with KFC instead. I don't know exactly how true that is, but for whatever reason, KFC is extremely popular in Japan, and it's most commonly eaten on Christmas, around Christmas, or specifically on Christmas Day. So Kentucky Fried Chicken in Japan, definitely a great Christmas meal. Number four, overworking deaths in Japan. It is not uncommon at all in Japan to meet someone who works for less than $55,000 US a year, but works between 60, 70, 80, 100 hours a week. And because Japanese workers traditionally were so overworked and would give their all for their company, many times people would die from overexertion just from working so hard. And the Japanese language actually has a phrase for this, which is called karoshi. Yeah, overworking in Japan happens so often that there's an actual term for it in the Japanese language. And in fact, if you fall asleep at your desk at some Japanese companies, it can be looked at as you working so hard that you fell asleep while you were working. So it might not necessarily be frowned upon like it would be in the United States. Number five, vending machines. So everyone who's been on the internet has probably seen stories or videos about Japanese vending machines being on every street corner in Japan. And while that's kind of true, like my house in Japan, I had like 3 or 4 vending machines within like a 2-block radius. They do have some really interesting vending machines as well, but they're probably a little bit more rare. Like I've heard of vending machines that sold underwear, gaming consoles like Xbox 360s and PlayStation 4s. I've had vending machines that sold takoyaki, which is fried octopus dumplings, so actual hot food, as well as cold drinks and hot drinks like coffee. Vending machines in Japan are just like a cultural thing that's a necessity. They are super convenient. You can get anything from a vending machine in Japan. Usually the weird ones are kept off to the side, like maybe inside of a store or in a major city like Tokyo or Osaka, probably not in smaller places. So one interesting thing about vending machines in Japan has nothing to do with the content of the vending machines, but rather the actor who's from the United States who's plastered all over every Boss coffee vending machine, and that is Tommy Lee Jones. I don't know why Tommy Lee Jones is so famous in Japan, but he's extremely famous in Japan, and he's been in dozens and dozens of Boss Coffee commercials. Therefore, his face is plastered on like half of the vending machines in Japan, because Boss Coffee machines are probably the most common coffee machines that you see in Japan. So when you go to Japan and you're feeling a little homesick, just stop by a Boss Coffee vending machine and take a look at Agent K for a second. It'll make you feel like you're right at home. Number 6, themed cafes and restaurants. Themed cafes and restaurants are something that you will see in major cities in Japan. You can find a maid cafe, a robot cafe, maybe a penguin bar, cat cafe, snake cafe. I've heard of one of those as well. I don't know why you would want to, drink coffee next to a ball python, but I guess you could if you wanted to in Japan. I personally have never been to one before. I've heard both good and bad things about them, but if you have a specific interest, maybe look it up and see if they have a themed cafe or restaurant for it. Number 7. Kit Kat flavors. Kit Kats are extremely popular in Japan, and I think that the reason for that is the term Kit Kat, when translated into Japanese, sounds like Kittokatsu. Kittokatsu in Japanese means surely you'll win. So it could be, a phrase that you could say for somebody who's about to play a sports game or something like that. Kittokatsu. Of course you're going to win, surely you're going to win. Therefore, they're kind of like the lucky candy bar of Japan. And in Japan, Kit Kats are consumed so often that there are flavors that you would never find outside of Japan, like mango, sakura, matcha, strawberry, sake, plum, and banana, which I personally did not think was that great, but there are hundreds of different flavors of Kit Kats that you should try when you're in Japan and bring back a bunch of them because you can't find them anywhere else. Number 8, different types of toilets in Japan. Traditional Japanese toilets are basically the same thing as Western toilets if you just flatten them all the way onto the ground and require squatting over them, hence the term squatty potty. But Japan also uses Western style toilets along with Western style toilets that have been Japanified. What I mean by that is Western style toilets that have heated toilet seats, music that plays for you, flushing sounds, and bidets. You find these in like higher end restaurants sometimes, but you'll also see them in McDonald's and people's houses. So Japanese toilets are pretty cool, especially the Western style Japanese toilets where, your butt is always warm when you sit down. Japanese style toilets are a little bit harder to get used to because, like I said, you have to squat over them. So unless you're used to being able to sit with your butt almost entirely on the ground, but having your legs spread apart, it's not really comfortable for a lot of people who are not used to that kind of toilet to use. So funny story, a friend of mine was climbing Mount Fuji and got diarrhea and had to use the bathroom, and the only toilet available in the area was a Japanese style toilet. So his legs were shaking and cramping by the time he was done using the bathroom, and he was not able to finish his climb because he felt terrible to begin with, and also because he had to squat down in a weird position that he was not used to for like 30 minutes. So he had to cut his climb short, which is unfortunate because climbing Mount Fuji seems like such a cool idea. Speaking of Mount Fuji, we're going to talk about that on number 9. Number 9, volcanoes in Japan. There are actually a ton of volcanoes in Japan. Over 110 active volcanoes at the moment, and about 50 of them or so are being monitored, actively monitored, just in case they show any signs of going off. So Mount Fuji, or Fujisan as it's referred to in Japanese, is actually another volcano. And that's a volcano that a lot of people don't realize is a volcano. A lot of people just assume that Mount Fuji is a mountain, but in fact it is a volcano. And if it was to have a major eruption, it would completely shut down all of Tokyo. Just a small amount of ash from Mount Fuji would shut down all travel in Tokyo and cause a lot of problems for Japan. There's actually a viral video from a couple years ago where a Japanese volcano called Mount Ontake erupted, and there were some mountain climbers that got caught in the ash. It's a crazy video. In that eruption, I think it was like 2014 or 2015, a couple dozen people were killed, which is really sad, but volcanoes are a major thing in Japan. There's a lot of volcanoes in Japan. Which brings us finally to number 10, which is not number 10 for any specific reason. These are just in a random order, but number 10. Japan actually suffers from a lot of earthquakes and typhoons. There's some confusion sometimes among English speakers between the word tsunami and typhoon. So a tsunami is a big wave and a typhoon is just a hurricane, but on a different part of the world. So what we would call a hurricane in the US would be a typhoon in Japan. And typhoons hit Japan very regularly, and really big typhoons hit Japan, really fast winds like Category 4, Category 5, pretty often as well. I was in one super typhoon when I was in Japan, so I've definitely seen a lot of these really powerful storms before, and they are intense. So intense that I've seen cars flipping through the air. Now on videos, but I was actually there when it happened. Cars flipping through the air, trees getting blown down, signs getting thrown all over the place, little tornadoes and things like that getting spun up. Pretty crazy weather in Japan sometimes. So because of that, Japanese building construction have to be built to a certain standard to be able to withstand, you know, certain winds and certain aspects of disasters, like natural disasters that they might run into. And with that, a lot of these buildings and houses are built with cement. So they'll pour cement into the ground in a square and put like steel beams, like reinforced steel in there as well, so that when an earthquake happens, buildings will tend to sway more than crumble and fall. And when winds come through from Category 5 typhoons, super typhoons, and things like that, you'll have windows break, but the houses themselves and the structures will remain intact. Playing catch or skateboarding during the eye, where there's like a lull in the storm, was one of my favorite things to do with my friends growing up during typhoons. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. If you would like to get more content like this every week, then check out my Patreon, which is patreon.com/JoshTheCollins. I'll also put a link for this in the description, and stay tuned for the end of this video where I'll show you some of the merchandise that we've created. If you're on my Patreon, you actually get $10 off of these shirts and hoodies. Check them out.